G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with JAZZA. I'm JAZZA, and in this video tutorial we're going to be talking about grayscale to color painting. Now I get this question asked to me quite a bit, in particular when people watch my speed paints, because in some of my speed paintings, as you've seen, the color paintings themselves are kind of done in a color. Let's say if there's a blue character, he'll be done in blue and then shaded with blue bits and then light blue bits. Whereas in some paintings, for example in this picture here, as you can see on the left, I painted it early on in grayscale and then added color later. Now the question often asked is, what makes me choose to do a grayscale to colorway as opposed to color to color, and why? What are the reasons behind those choices? So for me personally, it's a preference that depends on the image that I'm painting. If I'm painting directly into color, it tends to be because the color itself of the object I'm painting or the character I'm painting is a bit more simple and a little bit more consistent. Whereas in a painting like this and some other examples I'll show, the color will, in my mind, at least when I'm beginning the painting, will become very complicated. And so to remove that complication from the early process, I begin only with the shading, and that really simplifies things later on, because then I can just add all these complicated colors as overlays without really worrying about messing up how the light affects the image, how the shading is in the characters and all of that. So I'm going to use a really simple example in this picture I've done here, and there's a recent speed painting on my channel, so if you want to see me paint this, the original image, including this portion of that image, you can watch it sped up. I'll add a link in the description and an annotation to the screen around now. Otherwise, I will go into a little more detail as to how I did this. Now, it's really simple, and I wanted to make this image, and this is provided in the reference files below, so make sure you can download that and check it out in Photoshop yourself if you want to kind of break apart the image and look at how I did that. Now, the reason I wanted to paint this in grayscale first is because he has this coat of many colors, and rather than individually dividing all those areas into clipping masks, I wanted to just shade the character as a whole in black and white first, and then add the color as an overlay. So I'll show you how I did that first. I began with the line work. So this is the line work that I did of the character. Now I created a clipping mask, which is basically where I color the whole image in one flat color, and that doesn't really matter what color it is, as long as it's a solid color and it's under the line work. So to create a clipping mask, I'll create a new example one here. Let's say I fill in an area like this with fill this color. Okay, to create a clipping mask, I add a layer on top of that and alt click the line between those layers. So now when I get my brush and use a different color like black, you can see that where I paint stays completely in that area. So that is what a clipping mask does. Now, I've done other tutorials on that, but I'll suffice it to say I'll leave it at that for now. So I've got the grey clipping mask for this character, and the first thing I did was do the shading. And this is the end result of that shading. Now, as you can see, it's not completely black and white, like it's a bit of a sepia tone. I added that later because I felt it suited the color of the coat and the skin better with the overlays, but I always begin with it black and white. Now I'll show you a simple example as to how I would go about shading this with the black and white. I'll get my brush, I'll hit B, and I'll bring it to a size, a mid sort of size like that. I'll have hardness on 0 and opacity on something like 10%. And now with my black selected, you'll notice that I can kind of lay in the shadow like this. And I'll go through the image and I'll roughly kind of add areas of shadow and add areas of highlight. Now, another thing to remember is when you're doing this, that it can be difficult to control the brush sometimes, see how it's gone over here into the hair. So I'll go here and I'll erase that area in the hair so it's a bit smoother. And so I've done the face itself, I'll erase the area in the eyes. And so basically the early process of doing this grayscale coloring that I do, and that other people do as well, is doing the rough coloring first, kind of neatening things up as you go, and adding layer by layer of this dark shadow, and then adding highlights later on. And you can see in my very simple example, I've got the beginnings of the shading done. So I can add more detailed shading if I wanted to, so kind of small on the brush size and kind of go in the eyes, add a bit of definition to the nose, under the eyes, maybe shadows of underneath the hairline and under the jaw. So I'm just doing the head for an example here. I might want to, for example, add some rim lighting, so I'll get my eraser and just erase some of the light on the edges there, just to show the light shining from behind, like this. So that's a simple trick that I use that tends to make the image pop a lot more by adding a light source behind the object or the character, by doing that around the image. And you can see how very quickly I've added this layer of shading to this character. Now, how do I add color to that? Very simply, I add a new layer, I get my brush, I select a color, I'll find a skin tone like this, and I will bring up the opacity and bring up the hardness, and I'll paint it on. Now, at the moment, it's completely flat, right? So what I'll have to do is, in this layer above it, I change the color setting from normal to overlay, and you'll see how that instantly makes it this sort of added color with the shadows rather than a color just plonked on top of it and flattening it out. So that's an example of how I've done that. Now I'm going to just delete those and show you what the final product was, which is this shadow here. Now what I had done is, it was black like I did before, but I double clicked on the layer itself and I went to color overlay, and I made the color overlay just like a really dark brown. And that way you'll notice when I have this layer above it, which is color, which is set to overlay, rather than it being black, it's got kind of a softer, sepia tone to it. Okay, so that's just something I did for this image. It depends on the image, everything's always a bit different, so you kind of got to improvise your way through it. But you'll notice that if I turn this from overlay to normal, everything's completely flat. I just went through and just added the blank colors. So it's really, you'll notice how much of a time saver that is. If I went through and individually shaded every colored area specifically to what that color should be, there might be problems as well. I might not have the right color, then I'd have to kind of go through all that again. Whereas in this case, with the overlay, if I have the wrong color, I can simply select within the line work area, go back to my overlay area, and I could change the color just by simply right click, fill, bam, color change. And it doesn't affect the shading or anything like that. So you can understand why this grayscale to color painting method is very useful. Now, something I did for the skin is I had this overlay skin color, but you'll notice it's a bit dark and it's a bit rough looking. So I duplicated that skin layer and turned the overlay setting from overlay to screen, and I just lowered the opacity. So on 100% you'll notice the screen is very strong. When I bring it about halfway, it looks like a much nicer, softer skin tone. So you can use things like that, and it's very improvised based, because there are different materials that you're working with when you're going from grayscale to color, but you want to keep the shading basically the same. And it's all pretty straightforward from there. I've got the eye color, and then I've got an edge highlight, which I did to just add a bit of a golden rim on the edges to show the light from the background hitting this character. So as you can see, and I hope I've demonstrated it fairly simply, this grayscale to color painting method. Now, this file in particular is available for download in the link below, so if you want to look at it yourself or mess with it and just kind of learn how you can muck around with that, you can go check that out. Otherwise, I'll give you just a couple of quick examples before I finish the tutorial on some of the more complex methods and ways I've used the grayscale to color painting. So here's a painting I did, and there's a speed painting available on my channel if you want to watch it sped up. But this is a Slender Man speed painting. So I'll just make the layers beneath visible so you can see how I've painted this. So if I go into this layer here, and let's, for example, let's hide everything except for the girl. Okay. So this is the girl that I painted, and you can see that there's a great array of colors. She not only has a green sweater, but there are tints of orange and yellow to show the highlights. There's kind of like a red backing. Same with the hair. There's tints of red and yellow from the light, as well as the brown itself from the hair. So the reason I did grayscale to color for this painting is because I knew the lighting would be complicated. The skin tone isn't just a skin tone. There's highlights of blue from the camera. There's highlights of orange and red, and there's, you know, the blue of the tears and all this stuff. So I knew when I began this painting that it would be a little more complex with colors, and so to simplify it, I did it in black and white first. And I will show you this, show you the original picture in black and white. So this is what I painted first, and you can see that it's quite detailed, and I can get into all the detail that I wanted without worrying about color at all. And then when I added color, all I really had to do was paint it. So I've got it here set to soft light instead of overlay. I often like to muck around with these, so I'll kind of go through these and see which one kind of gets the color I want. So you'll notice with the Joseph picture that I did, overlay was the one I used, but for this it's not the look I wanted, whereas soft light has a much more painted quality about it. And then I added things like a texture overlay, and then simple things like desaturation and that. So in the end, the main thing I did to convert this from grayscale to color was have a layer above it, clipping mask to it, and then paint it all over it, and it's just a flat color thing but set to soft light. So that's an example there, and this is the last example that I'll show you. This is the Chaos Beast painting that I did, and I will hide the background and the foreground to show you what I did here with the character. And I'll hide the chains, and you can see this is the original grayscale painting I did. And as you can tell, again, I was able to spend a lot more time on details such as, you know, rims and the horns and the skin and all this stuff that if I was doing it immediately in color, I would have to do all that while worrying about the colors. Whereas doing it in grayscale first, I was able to then paint the color on top of that. And so I'll go in here and just kind of have a quick look at how I did that. I did a basic color overlay in a clipping mask. So I did this kind of brown sort of overlay. I wanted to find something as a basic skin tone. On the layer above that, I've darkened the mouth. On the layer above that, I've added the details of the mouth itself, so different teeth color and the gums. So I've kind of added layer by layer of the different areas I wanted to color. So here's the next one. So I added the darker color of the horns, and that's a multiply. On the layer above that, I desaturated that. On the layer above that, I've got his brown leather underpants codpiece thing. And then the armor on top of that, which is an overlay of just a gray. And then on the layer above that, we've got the lighting. And so this is where it really kind of shows the advantage of using the grayscale to color painting method, because I can do things like completely alter the lighting structure of this image very simply without really affecting anything that's been laid down, any of the details of the colors that have been laid down before, by simply adding, in this case, it's a layer set to vivid light. And if I set it to normal, you'll see what it is. It's really just a plain yellow color. So if I hide that and just show it, it's this sort of, you can see how it's painted to be very kind of lighting affected areas. And then when that's set to vivid light as it was, with all the colors showing, it shows that really sort of strong instant color effect. And then we have some more lighting above that, also set to vivid light, a bit more of a red for the fire behind. And then once the chains and the backgrounds and the foregrounds and the effects are all in place, you can see how very quickly a grayscale picture can look like it was never meant to be grayscale in the first place, but can have some really nice light and color effects that would otherwise be extremely complicated and frustrating to do. So I hope that this tutorial has somewhat explained how and why I choose to do grayscale sometimes as opposed to going straight into color. Sometimes, frankly, it's a decision of interest where I know when I'm doing a painting that I'm recording it for a speed painting. I know that for half the video in doing a grayscale painting, it might be less interesting to watch. So sometimes I choose the more complicated way of doing color first so that people can see the color from the beginning and it's more entertaining. But otherwise, the choice tends to be much more based on aesthetic and complication of lighting and texture. So I hope that this tutorial has been useful. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you later.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my videos.
You can download the reference files from this tutorial by clicking the link in the description. And remember to share any art, animation or game you make on Newgrounds.com. Until next time, see you later.